So this video is going to be a little bit different from normal. Typically what we've done in these videos is we've presented a moderate to complex example, and we've just sort of figured it out as we went along and discovered how to create a solution for the problem just on the fly as we go, which is exciting. It's an exploratory way of discovering a solution, which is often how we do it in IS. But we also tend to run into roadblocks and challenges and have to do some rework and rewind. And this has presented a little bit of frustration, I'm sure, for those who have watched. So in this batch processing example, I anticipated it being quite a bit more complex than anything we've done so far. And so instead of struggling through it and making errors over the course of an hour, trying to arrive at a workable solution, I decided to go ahead and create a solution ahead of time. And what I'm going to do is walk you through that solution step by step so you can have a better explanation of what each line does, which is also something that I think we neglect as we're just going through and building a solution. So this video, I will show you what I've already come up with and what it does and why I did it that way. And hopefully this will be a different perspective, a different way to help others who learn differently to gain value from this video. Again, this batch processing example that I'm about to show is quite a bit more complex than anything we'll expect of you anytime soon. So let's get going. This data I have is the bike buyers batch data. And we want to take it from this state where it's just 1,000 records, let's see, 1,052 records, to this state over here, where we have several more columns, many of which are calculated, and we have another sheet with some summary data and some other calculations. So how do we do that? Well, let me introduce you to the data real quick and then we'll talk through it. First off, we want to clean the data a little bit. You'll notice that there are some values missing. Notice this one, commute distance, the value is missing for this respondent. For this person, we don't have data whether they purchased a bike or not. And there are several missing values as we go through. You can see we don't have car data for this person, or this person, or this person. Wow. And there are several missing values. So one of the first things we want to do is remove rows where we have missing data. Now this might not be something you want to do every time you have a new data set, but for this particular example, we only want complete rows. We only want rows with complete data. So that's step number one. The next step would be to create a few more columns. Let me show you the columns we'd like to create. We'd like to create one for income bracket, which just takes the income that is reported right here and puts it into a lower, middle, or upper bracket. Then we want an age bracket, very similar thing, where we have young, middle age, and advancing. And then we have a score. This score is a calculation of how valuable that customer's demographics are for predicting whether they're going to buy a bike. This is a very rough, non-scientific score that I just came up with a formula for it. And then we have another column called profile, where we take several of the demographic variables and generate a profile label for that respondent. And so we have several different profiles, but definitely not one for each. It's not one unique for each respondent. There are only about 100, 150 different kinds of profiles. And what we'd like to do is understand which profiles we should target for purchasing bikes in the future. That's what this is, by the way. It's bike buyers data. We have whether or not they purchased a bike, and now we can use this data to help us determine who to target for advertising or whatever means of getting them into our store to purchase a bike. So who should we target? Well, we want to target those with the highest scores on average and that have the highest or the largest market availability. So for example, this profile had an average score of this, and there are 22 people with that profile. So I just multiplied those across and said, hey, here's our target score. And we want to target anyone with about 100 or over, any profile with 100 or over. So let's do that. Let's go to the code. Here is the code. Let me close this. And this is a lot of code, and it is far more complex than anything we've done so far. And so, again, that's why I wanted to not come up with it on the fly, but write it beforehand and then just walk you through it. So the first thing I do is I create this sort of master sub-procedure that we will use to call other sub-procedures or other functions even. And I know we haven't talked a lot about functions. So first things first, set up our variables. I created a variable, a range variable, for each column in our data set that we would be using later in formulas or in other procedures. So we have customer as a range and marital as a range. What this is doing is it's creating a variable that I can refer to as I move down this column, or whichever column. And then I can call the value of that range variable. Very handy. So I have all these ranges, and that's all I've declared as my variables. The next thing is we want to remove rows with any missing data. Well, instead of writing all the code and keeping it in this master sub, what I've done is I've created a separate sub, and I'm just going to call that sub. So let me go up here and go to the remove missing sub. Here it is. And what we do is we start at A2, activate that, and then we do until is empty active cell. We've done that quite a bit, so it probably doesn't need much explanation. But we can do that because there are no empty ID cells, and that's in column A. So we can go from the top to the bottom and not have to worry about it stopping early. Okay, so we'll do this, start our loop, and do it until we are at the bottom of our data set. And I have this in here, application.statusbar equals something. What this does is it changes the notification area, the status bar, down here at the bottom where it says ready. We change that to keep track of where we are. So in this case, I'm saying change the status bar status to say processing row whichever, and it's just whatever the active cells row is. So as we go through and run this, it's going to say processing row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it's going to go through as we process those rows. Now, we want to determine for each active cell if there are any blanks or empty cells within that row. That's what this will do. It checks from the active cell to the end of the data set on the right to see if there's any blank cell. If there is a blank cell, then we're going to active cell entire row dot delete it. So the entire row is going to be deleted. What that does is it's going to obviously delete the row and then shift up by default all the other rows. Because it is shifting up, our active cell also shifts to be the next cell down, which is now pushed up, so now it's on the same cell address. So we don't need to offset the active cell. We'll just delete and then do again. If there is no empty cell, so if this equates to false, then there are no empty cells in that row, and we're going to go ahead and check the next row. So we're going to increment the active cell. And it'll go through until it hits the bottom of our data set, and then we're going to return control over to Excel, the status bar. Return control over to Excel for that. And once you hit the end sub here, Excel knows to go back to where it was in the master sub. So that's at the very top here. Back to bike batch. So it just ran this whole thing. All that code happened inside this one line here. Next, I'm going to set up the new headers for the new variables. So we need a variable for income bracket, and a variable is just a column in a data set. We need a new variable for age bracket, score, and profile. And those will just go at the end of our data set. Cells, row 1, and then column 14, 15, 16, 17. So those will go over here. Okay, and once we have that done, we can start processing everything. So we say for each customer, remember this is a range variable, for each customer in range A2 to the bottom, this is just the ID column, so again there are no missing values in that column. In fact, there should be no missing values in any column anymore now that we've run the remove missing sub. But for each cell, essentially, each range object in this range, go ahead and update the status bar to tell us which row we're on. Set all these range variables, recall we dimmed them as ranges, set all these range variables as the appropriate cell. Now, when you are assigning a variable an object instead of a value, you need to say set. In the past, we've always just done something like marital equals whatever dot value, and so we'd give a variable a value. But in this case, we're not giving a variable a value, we're giving a variable an object, a range object. And so we have to say set this range variable to be this range object. In this case, it gets whatever row we're on during the loop, because we're going to do this for each customer. So for each range object customer, we're going to take its row and this column, which is marital. So column 2 should be marital. If I go back, here it is, marital status, column 2. So if I'm over here, customer is currently equal to this, or it's set as this cell, and marital will become B2, gender will become C2, etc. So we're just setting that in. Here's 3, 4, 5, just relevant to whichever customer we're currently on. And so we set all of those range variables, and now we can refer to them very easily. Now I could have just done all of this on the fly, and instead of using the variable marital, I could have used this line of code every time. But that gets kind of messy and you can't remember which one's referring to which, so I just set it all up once at the beginning, and then I can just use these semantically meaningful variable names instead. So moving on, now that we've set that up, we're going to create an income bracket variable. So we set the cell value over in whatever row we're in, and column 14, that's over here. Column 14 is N, and we're currently in, let's say, row 2. We give it a value of, and now it gets tricky, we call a function. This is going to be a little bit complex for some of us who've never done programming before. So we're saying it equals the value of whatever this function returns. Functions return values. So when we do this, VBA says, okay, well, let's get income. So let's go to the get income function and let's give that function this value. Well, we know what income.value is. Income is a range object that has the same row as the customer, and it's coming from column 4. So let's say we're on customer, this customer right here. It's going to go this row and this column, and so it's giving it this value. We're giving the number 10,000 to the get income function. Well, what does the get income function do? Let's go find it. Here's get income. It says get income receives a variable called income. It can actually be called Bob. It doesn't matter. We're going to keep the names the same to keep it simple. So it's expecting to receive a double variable. We're going to call it income, and it's going to spit back out. It's going to return a string. So it receives a double, returns a string. We gave it the number 10,000. So it's going to come in here and say, select case for income value variable. Is the value of that variable less than 35,000? Well, it's 10,000. So the answer is yes. This equates to true. Then the function is equal to this string. And when we're done with the function, it will return whatever it's equal to. So it's equal to lower at this point. If our number were greater than that, obviously we'd run through this and find out if it were middle or upper. In this case, it just returns lower. So let's go back up to our master function. Go down to that line. This is the line we were on. So we said go get income using 10,000 or whatever cell we were on. And so when we do that, it returns the string lower. So now this cell value equals lower. And if we go to the sheet, you can see that. Here it is, lower. That's what it was returned. Functions are pretty handy. Let me show you. I could, since I've written this function, say something like equals get age or get income. Here it is, get income. And I could give it the number 10,000. And it does it for me. Or I could say equals get income and give it this number. And it works. That's pretty fancy. So we wrote our own functions that we can now refer to using the equal sign in Excel. Very cool stuff. Let's see, Control Z. There it is. You learned something new. Now we're going to do the same thing for age. It's just the exact same thing. If you want to go down, let me show you real quick. Here's get age. Same thing. We give it an integer, the age, and it spits back out or returns a string, either young, middle age, or advancing. Let's go back up. Same sort of thing for get score, except this gets really fancy. Whoops. This gets really fancy. So get score is expecting multiple parameters. These are called parameters. So get score expects to receive, I'll have to go down to show you here, get score is expecting to receive in this order a string, a string, a string, and a string. And then it's going to give us back a double. So let's go back up. Here we are. So I said get score, use that function, and inside that function I specified as the first parameter another function. So what's this going to do? It's going to go to get score, but before it does, it's going to go to get income, and it's going to get the income value as a string for whatever our current income is, and it's going to do the same for get age. So it's going to run these functions prior to running the get score function. It's going to get the values for these, and then it's going to call the get score function, and then it's going to return a double, because that's what the get score returns for us. That is the score for buying bikes. That's pretty cool. So we have functions being called inside functions, and it works just fine. Now let me go down here to that function just to make sure we haven't skipped over anything too important. Get score. So get score is a lot like the other ones. We set up a formula just in comments here, and then we need to get the values for this formula. So we're going to get income, and we'll specify it. And what I do, okay, so what we're doing here is we're specifying a value for each of these. Let me explain this formula. I'm saying start with a base level of 6. Everyone gets a score of 6 to start out. Then add their income to that value. We're not going to add the exact income. We're going to add a 1, a 2, or a 3. Lower income gets a lower score. Then we're going to subtract their age. We're assuming younger folk might ride their bikes more. This is completely erroneous assumption. I'm just making things up here. Same with income. I assume people with more money will be able to spend more on bikes, and so that is good for us. We'd rather target people who have more income, lower age, and a smaller commute. Notice here commute is broken up into 5 things, and I say if you're within 0 to 1 miles, that's a value of 1, and we're going to subtract that, so we want lower values. So this is an ideal commute for us. And then we're going to multiply this by purchased. Now the data we have is already for customers who have already purchased bikes. So we're not going to target these people, but we want to target people like them, because we know whether or not these customers have actually purchased a bike. So if they have purchased a bike, let me go down here, then they get a 2, and we're going to multiply the results of this formula by 2. If they haven't purchased a bike, then they only get a 1, because they represent people who are less likely to purchase bikes. And so we'll multiply by 1. What this ends up giving us is a minimum value of 1. That's a minimum possible score. These are people we don't want to target because they represent a kind of demographic who have never shown any proclivity, if that's the right word, to purchase a bike from us. Then the maximum score is a 14. We would love to target people like this. So that's what getScore returns. In the end, again, you say that the function name equals some value, and that's what it will return, assuming that matches the expected variable type for that function. Okay, pretty complicated stuff. So glad we didn't do this on the fly. So it's going to do that, and then the next thing is to create a profile. So, for example, we want to create a sentence that says something like, married male with bachelor's doing clerical work in Europe. That just requires a little bit of string manipulation, but because it takes up a lot of room programmatically, again, I'm just going to call a function, and that function wants to receive your gender, marital, education, occupation, and region, because those are the variables that end up in this profile sentence. Going down to that function, get profile, here's what it does. It's actually fairly straightforward, so we maybe could have included this in the master sub directly, but it just says that the get profile now equals this string, your marital and space, gender and space with space, and education and comma. All these little formatting things are important, don't forget about them. Anyway, so it just throws together all these variables with a few strings, cleverly placed, and ends up with a sentence like this: single male with high school doing manual work in Europe. So that is a profile. And it turns out we end up with, I think, is 157 different profiles. Those are the possibilities. Almost there. Let's see. Then what we want to do is create a summary sheet. So we run the summary sheet sub, because it would have been a lot of extra code right here. Go down to summary sheet. And we're going to add a sheet named profiles. We're going to copy all of the profiles from our original sheet. So here's the profile column. We're going to copy that over, paste it into the new profiles sheet. Here's paste. And then we're going to remove duplicates. This says for everything in the current region of A1, which just means if you're on A1 and you hit Control A, it's going to select every contiguous variable, and then it's going to remove from that selected area all of the non-unique values and just leaves you with unique values. Then let's create some new headers right here, just across the top. Place formulas in there. Okay, these formulas, let me explain them a little bit. We could have done this programmatically, would have been a beast. So instead I just used formulas. You can actually write strings into cells and then it interprets it as a function. So I'm using the average if function. Go grab, well, it's just an average if function. Here's the criteria. Nope, is that right? Here's the range we're going to look at. Column 17 is what this is, C17. And then if it matches whatever cell row I'm in minus one column, then average up the profile score. That's what this does. Same sort of thing. Column 17, 2 to the left of where I am, and this is 1 to the left and 2 to the left. Multiply them together. Let me show you in the data set. Maybe that'll be easier. It just calculates the average score for this profile over on the original data set, and then counts how many times this profile shows up in that original data set, and then multiplies these two together in order to create the target score. And in the end, these are the folks we want to target. Let's go back here, make sure we didn't miss anything. Oh, here's how we fill. We select a range. We've already populated this range, B2 to D2, so we're going to select B2 to D2. And then we're going to choose to autofill to this range dynamically, using the end, down, and offset features. And then we're going to sort by D2, which is that target score. We're going to sort largest to smallest and apply that sort. Here's all the criteria for this sort. It's kind of complicated. How did I get most of this code? I did not type it out. I recorded a macro and then edited that macro, customized it a little bit, made it a little more efficient. Okay, once it's done with this sub, it's going to jump back up to the master sub. We're still in here. It just did summary sheet. It's going to now return control to Excel. It's going to return control of the status bar to Excel. It's going to auto-fit the summary sheet columns so that they all fit properly, and it's going to auto-fit the original dataset columns, and it's going to beep at us telling us it's done. So should we see if this works? Hopefully it will. Let's go back to here. I'm going to close this one. I'm going to delete. In fact, I'm going to delete this whole sheet, the profile sheet. Delete. And then over here, I'm going to delete all of the things we created. And now I'm going to run it. Here we go. It's, I'm not going to run it from here. I'll run it directly from the command area here. Developer, macros. Just show me in this workbook. Here it is, bike batch, the master macro. Notice the functions don't show up here. Just the sub procedures show up here. Okay, let's run. And remember to watch down here at the status bar. Okay, it's processing. I'm not getting a visual update. That's unfortunate. Sometimes it goes too fast. Oh, it's done. Huh, that was great. So, these are the ones we want to target. Single female with partial college doing clerical work in Europe. These are the ones who were most likely, well, these are the ones who represent purchasing bikes most often. The most people purchasing bikes most often, the balance between those, something like that. Notice they don't have the highest average, but there are a lot of them. If we were to sort by this one instead, average score, let's sort Z to A. There are those who have a much higher score, but there are only 4 of them. So biggest bang for the buck isn't going to be targeting these folks probably. Maybe these ones, they're 10s, and there are, no, only 3, 2, 1 of these. So you want to target larger groups who have a proclivity for buying. Anyway, that's it. Pretty massive example, and definitely more complex than we would expect of you, but I thought it would be helpful to show you some more advanced features for those of you who would like to move into this or reference this in the future.